Daf Nun Hey Amud Beis. We'll begin Daf Nun Hey Amud Aleph, 4 lines from the bottom at the 2 dots. The Kohen Gadol goes out from the Kodesh Kadosh, and he takes the klisharis that has the dam of the par, and he comes out into the heichal and he puts it onto the stand, the golden stand that was in the heichal. Now the Mishnah continues that there's also, according to the Tanakama, there was also another stand that the klisharis that had the blood of the sore of the goat, he put it on that stand. There were 2 stands, but Rabbi Yehuda says no, there was only 1 stand. So Tanan Hasan Rabbi Yehuda Omer Lo Hayu Sheishras Lakine Chayva B'Mnei Taruvas. So we're going to try to draw a comparison between our Mishnah and the reason that Rabbi Yehuda says there was only 1 stand in the case of our Mishnah for the klisharis for the blood, to the case of the Brisa that talks in Masechet Shkolim. Rabbi Yehuda says that there was no Lo Hayu Sheishras Lakine Chayva B'Mnei Taruvas. In the base of Mikdash, there were shayfers, there were pushkas, there were collection boxes. It was called shayfers because it was narrow on the top, it was wide on the bottom, it was narrow on the top, so that a Ganav couldn't put his hand into it and steal some of the money. They had 13 shayfers, but Rabbi Yehuda says, he argues on the Chachamim, he says it was for the birds, for the korbanos, for the birds, there was only for the nedava. But for a chayva, they didn't have a collection box. If a person gave a nedava of oilos, of a nedava for birds, so he would bring either doves or pigeons, and they would put it in the money into that collection box, and they would take the money, whether it was for geizlus or b'nei yaina, and they would take the money and they would be marked with it as a korban oila. But Rabbi Yehuda says for a chayva, so for instance for a zav or a zava or a yoledes, where it's a chayva, and the case the din is by the case of a chayva that one bird is for an oila, the other bird is a chatas. Over there, they did not have a pushka. They didn't put the money into the pushka in that case. So over there, he says they didn't do that, and they, in such a case, they didn't have the pushka, and the reason is mipnei hataruvas, because of the intermixing. So, my mipnei taruvas. What does he mean? What the mixing that he's concerned about? Amar Rav Yosef mipnei taruvas chayva nedava, because we're concerned that they'll mix the money that was intended for a nedava with the money that was intended for a chayva. The nedava monies are all oilas. The chayvas is one is an oila, one is a chatas. They might get intermingled, and the money that was supposed to be for an oila, they might be marked as a chatas, or a chatas as an oila. And the damim, the hazos, hadamim, the sprinkling of the blood on the 2 are different. The oil is on the top part of the mizbeach by the birds, and the chatas is below, and they have differences in how the blood is applied. So therefore, because of this concern, because of taruvas, he says there was no pushka for the chayva. Taisus asks a question: why are we not concerned about a chayva bechayva? Why is it only chayva b'nedava? Why aren't we concerned with the chayva l'chayva? Maybe the money that Leah put in was taken now for a rachel for Leah. The chatos money has to be designated for the owner. It has to be done l'shma. Why aren't we concerned by a chayva for a chayva? Why is it only about a chayva for a chatos? Taisa says because what was done is, or the procedure was, that each person would, when they would take the money and put it into the pushka, they would wrap it up. And the money was all wrapped up separately. So it wasn't all put the money into one big pot, one big box, so to speak. It was all wrapped up separately. The kohen would take the money, and he would take the money to use it for the korban. So he would take it, and it would be brought, the korban would be brought for whoever it is, whoever this money is, it would be brought and to be makrivid for this person. Taisus also says that he asks the question: why aren't we concerned? Why do we say therefore there was no kinim for the chayva, but there was for the nedava? Why not say the opposite? There was no pushka why was there no a pushka, no shayfer for the chayva there was for the nadava? Why not say the opposite, that there was a shayfer for the chayva but not the nadava? It says because the nadavas are more numerous, and therefore that's the one that they kept because it was more frequent and it was used more often. So, Amrle Abaya, in fact, the Kasha, V'navet Trei V'nichtav Alayo Chadachav. What's the problem? Why not just label them? Right on one Pushka Chayva, one on Nadava. My answer is Rabbi Yehuda, less like Siva. Rabbi Yehuda says that labeling isn't a sufficient safeguard, and we are still concerned that there might be confusion. Now, here's what we related to our Mishnah. This non we learned in our Mishnah, Rabbi Yehuda. He says, Lo Yasham Elakan Echad Bilvad. There was only one stand. They didn't have two stands. They didn't have one for the dam of the par and one for the sawyer. There was only one. So Trey my time Eloi, why didn't they have two stands? Mishum Mechalfi. Isn't it because we're concerned that he might take the wrong one? That if he has two stands, then he might take, and they're both there, he might take the wrong one, might take the dam of the par instead of the saw, or vice versa. So Venavid Trey Veluchtav Lai Hide the Bar by the Sar. So why is he concerned? Why not have two stands and label them? Right? One with par and one sawyer. Ella Rabbi Yehuda less like Siva. Must because Rabbi Yehuda says he does not hold of Siva. That's not a sufficient safeguard. So you see, it's Rabbi Yehuda Lishit may say, I'll ask you a kasha. How could you say that? It says, we learned in the Mishnah, there were 13 boxes in the Mikdash. They had 13 boxes in the base of Mikdash for the different types of money that was placed in, that was required to be donated, or given into the base of Mikdash for the different purposes. And there's 13 of these boxes. Via Kolsum Layman, they were labeled. It was written on them. One was Taklan Chadatin, new scholar. One was Teklin Atikin, old scholar. One was Kinim, birds. One was Goizli Oila, young oiler birds. One was for Eitzim, for wood. One was for Lavoina. One was for Vizov Lekapyrus, the gold for the Klishoris. Vishisha Lenadova. And 6 for Nadovas. So they had these different pushkas, they had these different cases for the different applications that were used in the base of Mikdash. The Mishnah explains. Those were used for the shkolim for every year. Annually, they had to bring the matzahs a shekel. And they will use the matzahs a shekel to bring the Talmid, the Korban Talmid, the Korban Tzibur that were needed for this year. They came from the new shkolim, from the matzahs a shekel, that was put into the box called Tiklin Chadatin, the new ones. Tiklin Atikin was, what was that for? Mishalei Shakal Ishtaked Yishkol Shana Abo. The one who forgot to give the matzahs a shekel last year, he still is obligated to make up for it. He has to give it this year. It's not used for the Korban Talmid because the Korban Talmid has to come from the current year, but he had to donate it anyway, and it was used for repairs, and it was for the walls of the Yerushalayim and the towers. It was used for that purpose. Kinim hein tzer. Kinim are doves. Those are pigeons, v'kulan oilers, and they're all oilers. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. That's what Rabbi Yehuda says. Like we mentioned before, the Rabbi Yehuda says there was no pushka, there was no collection bought for the kinei chayva, which is one is an oiler, one is a chatas. Over here, there was only for the oilers. There was only for the nadovas which are oilers. The Tazishana explains they had to have two because a person who donated for a dove could not bring for a pigeon and vice versa. But they did not have it for the Kinei Chayva. What were the 6 that was Linadova, when it says 6 Linadova? So that 6 Linadova was if there was a Meiser, a Chatas, or a Meiser of an Osha. Meaning in the case where you had the behemoth that was left to graze. For instance, there was 2 animals that were set aside. A person was makdish 2 animals. One that he's makriv, and the other one should be for an achrayas, in case the one gets lost. So he can only be makriv one for the chatas or for the asham. The other one is left to graze, it has a mum, and then the money is used for a korban tzibur. It's used for when the mizbeach is idle, when there's not makriv anything on the mizbeach, they are makriv, use this money to be makriv the korban tzibur, the oilus tzibur. That's why there's 6 of them. There's different reasons given, but one reason is that it corresponds to the 6 batei avos. So there were 6 batei avos. Teisus Shalom explains that there was no pushka for the nedava for a behema, for a private nedava for a behema, because there the owner would have to, there's a mitzvah smicha, so he has to bring the animal itself to do smicha on it. So we see this is what Rabbi Yehuda says. So therefore, we see clearly that all the 13 pushkas, they were labeled. So he does, therefore, rely on ksiva. So therefore, what is the reason that he says that there is no collection box for kinei chayva? It's not because he doesn't rely on the writing, because the 13 shayfers were labeled. Ki also Rav Dimi Omar, when Rav Dimi came to Babel, he said, Amri b'marav, they said, Eretz Yisrael gzera mishum chata shemeisa ba'aleh. It's a gzera on account of a chata shemeisa ba'aleh. A chata is where the owner died before they were makraved, so the animal would be left to die. If there's money, it has to be thrown to Yom HaMelech. We're concerned that perhaps the owner died, he gave the money, put it into the pushka, and if you put it in the pushka, we're afraid that perhaps before they were makraved, he already died. And in that case, you have money that cannot be used, and that has money that has to be thrown to Yom HaMelech, and therefore the taruvis would aser all of them. And as Rishonim speak out, we don't go basar here because the money is a davar chashuv, it's not bottle, and therefore that's what we're concerned about. So therefore, they did not have a pushka for the kinei chayv. Now, if it be an adava, even if the owner died, then you could be makravit. It's only a concern by the chayva. Are we concerned that perhaps the owner died? We learned in the Mishnah. If a person sends his chatas to the base of Mikdash, he's in Medina Siyam, and he sends it. Now, it'll be a period of time before it gets to the base of Mikdash. Nevertheless, there's still makravit based on the chazaka that he's still alive. We're not concerned that perhaps he died. So we see that this is not a concern over here. Taisus points out that that's in a case where we're not concerned only when he doesn't reach the years of where he's 80 plus. But when he's in his 80s already, we are concerned. But normally, otherwise, we are not concerned. Rather, what we're concerned about is that we know of a case where the owner died, and we know that the owner died, and therefore the concern is that the money is now, if you have this money all together, it's all mixed together, there's an owner who died, and we don't know which money it is, and it will answer all of the money. So that's why we don't have the pushka, because perhaps prior to the hakrava, there will be a case where we know of we'll know that the owner died, and the taruvas, the mixture, will all be also. Well, let us just take 4 zuzim, meaning the price of the bird, take 4 zuzim and throw it into Yom Melech v'hanach nishtri, and that'll be mater all the rest of them. Why not take the 4 zuzim from it and take that and throw it in and say, therefore, determine that that is the money that belonged to the owner. Now, the Rishonim all speak out, or most of the Rishonim speak out rather, that how does this work? How can this be how can you say take the money and be mater the rest of them? Now, as we're going to mention in the more shortly, the principle to say that this is mutter is breira. That you say an event that happens later, we say Hoover Dover Lamafreya, let it determine retroactively that from the very outset this was the case. But in a case where you have a taruvis, you have a mixture of something which is also and something which is mutter, how is Breira going to say that to identify, this is the one that's also? If you have meat if you have meat that is kosher mixed together with meat that is treif, you can't say take one piece and throw it out and therefore say all of the rest is mutter and say the one that I took was the one that was treif. There's no process to say that was Hoover Darvel Mafreya, that there's a determination retroactively that one was treif. If there's something where something was not designated and there's a future event that can designate it retroactively, we can say that. But how does it work in this case? The Tosfos Rishonim and other Rishonim therefore explain that when the money is put into the box, the way it would work is that it was done al tanai, it was done with the condition that they would make a tanai and say that if any of the members died, any of the people put the money into the pushka, into the box at that time, if they died before the hakrava, the money that was taken and thrown into Yom HaMelech, that should belong to that dead person. And the money that the dead person put into the box initially would belong to the person that his money was taken and thrown to Yom HaMelech. So they make a condition that if anybody died, the money that was thrown should be considered his money, and the money that he initially put in should belong to the person who is alive, whose money was taken into Yom HaMelech. So they make a condition that it should belong to the rightful person. And therefore, it could work over Darvel Mafreya that we say that the money that the dead person initially put into the box, over Darvel Mafreya that the money that was thrown into Yom HaMelech is his money. So more answers that we say, however, Rabbi Yehuda Leslie Breyer. But this cannot work because Rabbi Yehuda Leslie Breira. Therefore, since Rabbi Yehuda does not hold a Breira, as we'll see in the next Talmud, where we know that Rabbi Yehuda does not hold a Breira, but since Rabbi Yehuda does not hold a Breira, that you cannot make a determination later to say retroactively that was designated right from the beginning, from the outset. Therefore, this is not an Eitzah, and therefore there was no box, collection box for the Kinei Chayva.